The rain has not stopped in 4 hours. She stands at the south window of the library, slate gray against the wet gray glass, and I am 21 years old asking the question I have spent 3 weeks not asking. How long, Duchess? Her shoulders do not move. The rain on the window is the only sound in the room. She speaks without turning, eyes fixed on the storm beyond. More than a year. Before the contract. Before my sister. Before any of it. I rise from the long table. I cross the library. I stop 3 feet from her at the window. My voice does not shake. I look at her gray eyes and I say, "Look at me." I was halfway down the carved oak staircase of Marchcombe House, with my hand on the banister and my hair only half pinned, and a book of my grandmother's poetry still tucked under my arm. I had been on my way to the breakfast room, intending to ask my mother whether the cook could be persuaded to send the eggs back, the kind of unimportant grievance I had been allowed to nurse for 21 years as the second daughter. I stood on the staircase and looked at the Duchess of Ashendale across the marble of the entrance hall, and I understood with the cold, instant clarity that comes once or twice in a person's life that the version of myself I had been an hour ago was not coming back. She was taller than I remembered. I had seen her perhaps 4 times in my life, all at balls, all at a distance, all when she had been there to look at Cordelia. She had hair the color of old wheat pinned at the nape of her neck and a mouth that did not appear to know how to soften. The gray of her gloves matched, exactly, the gray of her eyes. She held the marriage contract folded once in her right hand. It was, as far as I could tell, the only thing in the room she was paying attention to until she found me on the stairs. My father had stopped speaking entirely. My mother was sitting in the silk chair beside the long case clock, with both hands pressed to her face. The clock ticked. The Duchess took 1 step forward into the center of the hall, and I noticed, with the strange detached clarity of the moment, that her boots made almost no sound on the marble, as though she had trained herself even in the smallest particulars of how she moved through a room. "Elspeth, is it not?" She remembered my name. I had not believed she knew it. "Yes, Your Grace." "Come down." I came down. My slippers made no sound on the runner. The book of poetry was a stupid thing to be carrying. I did not put it down because putting it down would have looked like obedience, and I had decided, somewhere between the 3rd and 2nd step from the bottom, that I was not going to look obedient to this woman if I could possibly avoid it. She did not extend her hand. She looked at me from the height of her own perfect posture, and her eyes did one quick, complete circuit of my face, my dress, my hair, the book under my arm, the way I held my shoulders. It was not the way a person looks at a stranger. It was the way a person looks at a problem they have just been handed and intend to solve correctly. "Your sister has chosen the cloister." "It would appear so, Your Grace." "The contract specifies the elder daughter of Marchcombe House." "I am aware of what the contract specifies." A small pause. Half a second. The kind of pause I would catalogue later as one of her tells, though I did not yet know it was a tell. Her gloved fingers shifted minutely against the folded paper. "It is a matter," she said, "that can be amended." "By whom?" My father made a small wounded sound from the corner of the hall. The Duchess did not look at him. She looked at me. "By the parties to the original contract. Your father, who signed it, and myself, who countersigned it. The cloister is a permanent disposition. The contract requires a daughter of this house. You speak of my sister as though she were a portion of land that had become unsuitable. I speak of the contract. My sister is a person. Your sister has taken vows." For the first time, her voice carried something I could not quite identify, something cooler than the surface cold she had brought into the hall. She has removed herself from the question. "I am here to discuss what remains." "What remains is me, Your Grace." "Yes." The clock ticked. My mother had not lowered her hands. My father, who had not spoken in nearly 2 minutes, finally found enough air for one word. "Sabine." The Duchess's eyes did not move from mine. "Lord Marchcombe. Surely there is some other arrangement. Surely the matter. Elspeth is 21 years old. She has not been prepared. There has been no announcement. There can be an announcement by week's end." "Sabine." "Lord Marchcombe." It was extraordinary, the way she made his name sound like a closing door. I had observed many cold people in 21 years. I had not understood until this moment that genuine coldness was not loud or theatrical, that it was simply the absence of any appeal a softer person might attempt to make. She was not refusing my father his negotiation. She was declining to participate in the premise that a negotiation existed. I felt, somewhere underneath the cold, bright alertness that had taken over my body when she said my name, the first stirring of something I did not have a word for yet. It was not fear. It was not even, precisely, anger. It was the recognition of being seen, properly seen, for the first time in my life, by someone who had walked into a room full of better-favored people and chosen to fix her attention on me alone. "May I speak with the Duchess privately?" My father turned to look at me as though I had pulled a dagger from my book. My mother lowered her hands. "It is my name on the amended contract, Papa." I would speak with her privately, for 5 minutes, in the small drawing room. The Duchess inclined her head 1/2 inch. It was, I would learn later, the closest thing she had to a yes. The small drawing room was the one my mother used for the visits of women she did not particularly like, chosen for its uncomfortable chairs and drafty window. I led the Duchess into it and pulled the door closed behind us, and turned to face her with my back to the door, because I needed something solid behind me before I said what I intended to say. She did not sit. I did not invite her to. She stood in the center of the room with the contract still in her right hand and her gray eyes on me, and waited, and the waiting itself was a kind of pressure, the way a held breath is a kind of pressure, though I could not have said in that moment whose breath was being held. "You called me, little one." "I did. I would like you not to do that again." A small pause. Then, noted, "I am not a child. I am not your inferior. You have just informed my father that you intend to marry me by the end of the week, and I will not have you addressing me as though I were a kitchen maid. You are correct. I will not address you that way again." I had not been expecting her to agree. I had been preparing further argument. I felt it collide with the back of my own teeth and sit there with nowhere to go. She watched me work this out. There was nothing patient in her watching. There was nothing impatient in it either. She watched me the way one watches an animal one is studying, which I knew should have been offensive and somehow, in the specific quality of her attention, was not. "Tell me, Your Grace, why? Why what? Why you have come? Why you would accept the substitution rather than turn your carriage around at the gates upon hearing that my sister has fled to a convent?" "Because the contract." "Do not say the contract." The faintest movement at the corner of her mouth. "Not amusement. The kind of movement that says, noted, you do not accept that answer. I have heard you. The marriage between Marchcombe and Ashendale," she said, "was arranged for reasons of property and proximity. Your father holds the river meadow at Stenholm. My estate borders it on the west bank. The drainage works are mutually dependent. The arrangement is rational. You have come for a meadow. I have come for a drainage easement that has been the subject of 3 lawsuits in 2 generations, the last of which my father lost. The marriage closes the suit permanently. You have come for a meadow and a piece of paper. I have come for what was promised." I looked at her, and I understood that she was lying to me in some way I could not yet name. Not about the meadow. The meadow was undoubtedly real. Lying by omission of the part of the answer that would have explained, properly, why a woman who held one of the oldest dukedoms in the country had traveled 4 hours to claim the second daughter of a minor baron. On the same morning her intended bride had fled to a convent. I did not know what the omission was. I knew only that it was there. "You will give me until tomorrow morning." "I will give you until tomorrow morning. You will not call me little one." I have already conceded that point. "You will not call me anything that is not my name." The half-second pause again. Her gloved hand shifted once against the contract. "Elspeth." It was the first time she had used my name without title or context, and it landed in the small drafty drawing room with a weight I had not been prepared for. She said it precisely. She said it without softening. She said it as though she had been waiting to. "Yes, Your Grace." At 9. She left. She did not bow, she did not curtsy, she did not perform any of the small courtesies that women of her rank performed automatically with women of mine. I stood in the small drawing room, with my back to the door for a long time before I understood that my mother was crying again in the entrance hall, and that I had not, in fact, agreed to anything. I had asked for a night. And she had given it to me, which was not the same as agreement, which was not even the same as negotiation. It was a courtesy. It was the courtesy a creditor extends to a debtor when the debtor is, in any case, going to pay. I went to bed that night, for what I understood, in advance, was the last time in my own room. I lay in the dark and thought about my sister at the convent of St. Lyriel, about a meadow and a contract and a drainage suit, about the way the Duchess of Ashendale had said my name. I did not, even then, believe the meadow. She returned at 9, in dark gray rather than black, with her own solicitor, a thin gray man named Mr. Crewe who never looked anyone in the face. The amended contract was produced. My father read it 3 times. My mother sat with a handkerchief pressed to her mouth and did not speak. The terms were the same as those agreed for Cordelia, with the one modification of the name. The Duchess had crossed out my sister's name in her own hand and written mine above it. The ink of my name was a slightly darker gray than the ink of Cordelia's. They had been written on different mornings. I signed. The signature took less than 3 seconds. My father signed after me, his hand shaking. The Duchess countersigned without sitting. Mr. Crewe folded the document, sealed it, tucked it into a leather case. The legal portion of my life, as it had been to that point, was concluded. The wedding will be at the chapel at Ashendale in 3 weeks, the Duchess said. You will come a week before. I will send a carriage. Mrs. Hollinsworth, my housekeeper, will write to your mother with the necessary lists. Your Grace. Yes, Elspeth. What do I call you? A very small pause. She had not, I think, prepared for that question, which was strange given that she had prepared for everything else. Sabine, in private. Your Grace, in any company. Even on the first night. A longer pause. Her gray eyes held mine, and there was something in them now that was not the cold of the hall and was not the composure of the carriage. It was, for the briefest of seconds, the discipline of a person standing very still while a strong wind passed across the surface of her. In private, she said, you may use whichever you prefer. She left without further conversation. I stood at the window of my father's study and watched her carriage descend the drive and turn onto the western road that led, eventually, after 4 hours of indifferent country, to Ashendale Castle. The week before the wedding, I traveled alone. My mother had wished to Cussa. My father had wished to come. I had requested, with the firmness that had been growing in me since the morning in the hall, that they not. You will not even know the house. Then I will learn it. He had not argued further. He had, I think, recognized that something had been done to me by the events of the previous fortnight that he did not have the language to address, and that the simplest of the kind things he could now do for me was to permit me the small dignities I was claiming for myself. The Duchess's carriage came for me on a Tuesday morning, black and quiet and well-sprung, the matched grays that pulled it the color of her gloves. The coachman was older than my father, and handed me into the carriage with the practiced disinterest of a man who had spent 40 years handing women into carriages and had stopped finding it remarkable. The journey took 4 hours. I thought about my sister, about the contract, about the meadow at Stenholm. I had ridden across exactly twice in my life, and that had now, somehow, become the official reason for my marriage. Mostly I thought about her tells. 3 of them, in 2 short interviews, the half-second pause before answering, the gloved hand shifting against the contract, the brief stillness when I had asked her what to call her. I had been a quiet, observant person all my life, the second daughter of a household that had focused most of its attention on the first daughter, and I had used the spare attention available to me to learn how to read rooms and faces and the small, involuntary motions by which people betrayed the things they were not saying. The Duchess of Ashendale did not betray much. She did not betray nothing. I arrived at the castle at 2:30. Ashendale rose out of low parkland the way old houses do, more by accumulation than by intention, the original Norman keep visible at the north end, the long Jacobean wing running south from it, the 18th century library wing reaching westward toward the lake. It had been, I knew from my father's library, a property in continuous occupation by the same family for 900 years. Sabine was the 12th Duchess in her own right, and the first to hold the title since the Restoration without a duke beside her, inherited from a great-uncle who had outlived 3 sons and a daughter, and had, in the end, settled the dukedom on his sister's only granddaughter for want of any nearer choice. I had read about her a great deal in the fortnight between signing the contract and arriving at her door, though none of what I had read had prepared me for the precise weight of standing in her hall. She was not at the door to meet me, Mrs. Hollinsworth was perhaps 50, perhaps 60, iron-gray hair, a face that had seen everything and approved of approximately half of it. She inclined her head a precise 3 degrees. Miss Marchcombe, Mrs. Hollinsworth. Her Grace is in the library. She has asked that you be shown to your rooms first and that you join her for tea at 4. The east apartment has been prepared for you. I will take you up. Thank you. The east apartment was 3 rooms and a dressing closet, all of them larger than any bedchamber in Marchcombe House. The fire had been built up. The curtains had been pulled back. The window of the small library looked out across a knot garden toward an orchard, and beyond the orchard to a paddock, and beyond the paddock to a line of gray hills. On the writing desk was a small stack of books. I went to them before I removed my traveling cloak. The top one was a volume of my grandmother's poetry, of which fewer than 100 copies had ever been printed. The same edition I had been carrying down the stairs at Marchcombe House the morning Sabine had walked into the hall. The second was a volume of Anne Bradstreet that I had mentioned, in passing, to a cousin of Sabine's at a London ball the previous season, a conversation I would have sworn no one within 10 feet of us had been attending to. The third was a thin, gray, cloth-bound book of essays by an obscure French moralist that I had borrowed from the lending library at Stenholm Village 4 months ago, and returned without speaking to anyone about it. I stood at the writing desk and looked at the books for a long time. She had been paying attention to me for at least 4 months, 14 months. In fact, the Bradstreet conversation had been in March of the previous year, which made it 14 months in which I had assumed that no one of any consequence was watching me at all, that the dukedoms and the marriages and the great house affairs of the country were arranging themselves around my elder sister and the brighter cousins and the more eligible girls of the better families, and that I, the quiet second daughter with her books and her opinions and her unfashionable taste in moralists, was being permitted to be invisible. I had not been invisible. I had been catalogued. I sat down at the writing desk and did not remove my cloak for a quarter of an hour. I did not weep. I did not, precisely, feel anything I could have named. I felt the same cold, bright alertness I had felt on the staircase at Marchcombe House when she had said my name, and I felt the first, sharper edge of something that was not anger, and was not fear, and was not, I had to admit, displeasure. It was the recognition of being chosen, not negotiated for, not substituted, chosen. I took tea with her at 4 in the small green drawing room overlooking the knot garden. She was in slate, with a high collar and a single string of pearls. She had taken off her gloves, which I had not previously seen her do, and her hands were smaller than I had expected and very precise in their motion as she poured. "You found the books." "I did. The Bradstreet was easy. The gray French essays cost me some inquiry. I borrowed them anonymously." "Yes. From a lending library that does not keep records of borrowers. I had to ask the librarian directly. She was reluctant. I gave the library £20 for new acquisitions. You bribed a village librarian to find out what I had been reading." I commissioned a bursary for the library and inquired, in passing, who had recently shown interest in the philosophical shelf. "Yes." "How long, Sabine?" The half-second pause, her hand stilled on the handle of the teapot. "How long what? How long have you been paying attention to me?" "That is a question I would prefer to answer at a different time." "I would prefer you answer it now." "And I would prefer not to. The wedding is in 7 days. There will be a great many conversations between us. This is not the one I propose to have first." We sat in silence for the duration of 1 full cup of tea. At the end of it, she set her empty cup down with the same precision with which she had picked it up, and she said, "I am going to ride before dinner. Mrs. Hollinsworth will send the dressmaker to you at 5. I will see you at dinner." She left. I sat in the green drawing room with the books she had bought me, and the tea she had poured me, and the unanswered question hanging in the air between her empty chair and mine, and I understood with a slow and uncomfortable certainty that whatever was happening at Ashendale Castle was not a contract, and was not a meadow, and was not a substitution. I did not know yet what it was. I knew that I was going to find out. The wedding was a small affair by the standards of the dukedom, and a vast one by the standards of my own family. The chapel at Ashendale had been built in the 14th century, and re-roofed in the 17th, and held perhaps 40 people in comfort. There were 40 people in it. Mrs. Hollinsworth had arranged everything. The Duchess wore dove-gray silk and a fall of old lace at the throat. I wore the white my mother had ordered hastily, and the diamond comb my grandmother had left me in her will. Sabine did not look at me down the aisle. She looked at the priest. She made her responses precisely. When the priest reached the portion of the service in which we were required to face one another, she turned to me with the same composed attention she had brought to every interaction we had ever had, and her gray eyes found mine, and I understood for the first time what it cost her to hold them there. I saw it in the set of her shoulders and the absolute stillness of her gloved hands, and the way her jaw was, almost imperceptibly, locked. We were declared married. She did not kiss me. She inclined her head 1/2 inch. I returned the inclination. The wedding breakfast lasted 3 hours. I sat at one end of the long table and Sabine sat at the other, and we made polite conversation with the guests in our immediate vicinity, and we did not, across the entire 3 hours, speak directly to each other. It was perfectly proper. It was also, I understood, deliberate. She was managing the room, and the room required that the new Duchess of Ashendale be visibly Duchess, and the easiest way to maintain that visibility was to maintain the formal distance between us that the table arrangement enforced. The guests left at 4. Mrs. Hollinsworth supervised the carriages. The house emptied of all but its staff and its 2 principal residents within an hour. I went to my apartment to change out of the white silk and into something less ceremonial. The dressmaker had hung 6 new gowns in my dressing closet over the course of the week. I chose the simplest of them, a dove-gray wool that I knew, suddenly, with the kind of certainty that surprised me, had been chosen for me because it was the color Sabine herself wore most often. I went down to dinner at 7. We were the only 2 at the table, in the small dining room, with candles, and a single low arrangement of white roses. "I trust your apartment is to your liking." "It is. If anything is wanting, you have only to ask Mrs. Hollinsworth." "Nothing is wanting, your grace." A small pause. Her wineglass paused at her lips. Sabine. She discussed, briefly, the management of the home farm, a problem with one of the cottages on the South Estate. She asked whether I rode. I said tolerably. She said the stables held a chestnut mare that had been bought for a previous occupant of my apartment, steady and well-mannered, that would be at my disposal whenever I wished her. I asked, since she had given me the opening, who the previous occupant of my apartment had been. My cousin, Lady Henrietta Ardencroft. She was companion to my great-aunt for many years, and died at the age of 83 in the bed you now sleep in. The mare was a gift from my great-aunt on the occasion of Henrietta's 70th birthday. You give me an 83-year-old woman's apartment. I give you the largest and best aired apartment in the house excepting my own, which I do not propose to share. Noted. She looked at me across the candles. A long, level look. I will not share my chamber with you. Not tonight. Not, I think, for some considerable time. I propose to make this clear at the outset, because I have no wish to leave the question hanging between us. You have brought me here, your grace. You have stood at the altar with me this morning. You have purchased a meadow, and you propose to leave me to sleep in an 83-year-old woman's bed. For the present. Why? Because I would not have you to bed under duress, and I would not have you to bed before you have asked it of me, and I would not have you to bed in any manner that you could later look back on and consider as something taken from you, rather than something given by you. I do not propose to negotiate that point. I propose to inform you of it. That is the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever said to me. It is the only honest version of what I am offering you. And if I never ask, a very long pause, then I am content to be your Duchess and your protector and the keeper of your meadow, and you will live in this house in safety and in comfort, and you will read your French moralists, and you will ride the chestnut mare, and you will be, in any way that the world can see, the Duchess of Ashendale's wife. And in any way that is private between us, you will be precisely what you have asked to be, no more. You will live celibate. I will live as I choose to live. I am not a young woman. I am not, in any case, a woman who finds her life much disordered by such matters. I will live as I always have. Have you always lived alone? A pause. I have lived alone, Elspeth. Yes, I did not believe her. Exactly. Or, I believed her. But I believed there were several layers of meaning folded into the phrase that I had not yet found a way to unfold. I understood that she had said as much as she was willing to say at this table, on this night, on the matter of how the two of us would dispose of the long years that the contract had now bound us to. I finished my wine. She finished hers. She rose from the table at 9:30, inclined her head, said good night, and left. I went to my apartment alone. The fire had been built up. A nightdress had been laid across the bed. The book of my grandmother's poetry had been moved to the small table beside the bed, with a marker in it at the page I had last read at Marchcombe House, which Sabine could only have known by having had someone look at the book. In my apartment, in my absence, which meant that I had been observed even in this house, this room, this morning. I lay in the 83-year-old woman's bed and looked at the canopy above me and thought about all of it. I did not weep. I was beginning to understand that I might not weep at all. The first weeks at Ashendale established themselves into a pattern that was almost a household and was almost a marriage, and was, in every important particular, neither. Sabine rose at 6 and rode for an hour. She breakfasted alone at 7. She conducted estate business with her steward from 8 to noon. She lunched, when in the house, with me. She dined with me at 7. She went to her own chamber by 10. She did not knock on the door of mine. She did, however, watch me. I was perhaps the only person in the house aware of this, because I had become, in those first weeks, the most quiet and observant person I had ever been. She watched me at meals when she thought my attention was on my plate. She watched me at evening when she thought my attention was on my book. She watched me, once, from the library window as I crossed the lawn with the chestnut mare's bridle in my hand, and I felt her watching as clearly as I would have felt a hand on my shoulder, and I did not look up, because looking up would have been answering, and I had decided I was not going to answer her watching until she found the courage to do it openly. I catalogued, in addition to the watching, a great many smaller things. The fire in my bedchamber was kept higher than the fires in any other room in the house. I learned this from the housemaid Effie, who mentioned it casually on the third morning while clearing the grate, and who looked, when I asked why, as though she had been told it was so and had not been told why and did not propose to inquire. The cook sent up, on the second morning, a particular tea that I had drunk only once in my life, at a friend's mother's house in London, mentioned in a letter to my own mother 6 months previously. I did not see how Sabine could possibly have known. I drank it without comment. The library, a great wing of perhaps 8,000 volumes, acquired in the second week a small new bookcase in the southwest corner, freshly built, into which had been placed perhaps 150 volumes of recently published novels and essays and poetry, almost terrifyingly suited to my own taste. There were books I had read and books I had not read, but would have liked to read, and books I had not heard of, but discovered, upon opening them, were precisely the books I had been wanting all my life, without knowing it. There were no books I would not have wanted. She had built me, in 2 weeks, the library I would have built for myself if I had ever had the money. I did not mention the bookcase to her. She did not mention it to me. I waited. I had begun to understand that whatever Sabine Ardencroft was managing required her to manage it alone, and that whatever I forced her to acknowledge before she was ready would not be the truth of what she was managing, but only the defended version of it. I would wait until the discipline cracked of itself. The discipline cracked on a Tuesday in the 3rd week. It was raining hard and had been raining all afternoon. I was in the library reading at the long table by the south window, and Sabine had come in at 4 to consult the atlas about something her steward had said, and the rain had become loud enough to make conversation difficult, and Mrs. Hollingsworth had not yet rung for tea, and there was no one in the wing but the 2 of us. She closed the atlas and stood at the window looking out at the rain. "You have been here 3 weeks. You have not asked me a single question about the contract since we signed it." "No. I expected you to ask a great many more questions. What stopped you?" I closed my book. "I am waiting for you to tell me without my asking." A long pause. The rain on the window. Her back. Very straight. "That is more patience than I have earned, Elspeth." "It is not patience, Sabine. It is the recognition that anything you tell me under questioning is not going to be the thing I want to hear. So I am waiting until you tell me without it." She did not turn around. The rain went on. I watched the line of her shoulders in the dim gray light of the wet afternoon, and I saw, for the first time, the exact shape of the discipline she was carrying. It was not stiffness. It was not the rigidity of a person under physical strain. It was the stillness of a person standing very precisely inside the small space they had permitted themselves and refusing to step outside it. "I do not know," she said to the window, "how to tell you the thing you want to hear, without losing the thing I am trying to preserve." "What are you trying to preserve?" "My discipline. The arrangement I made with myself before I came to Marchcombe House. The terms under which I told myself I would be permitted to do this at all." "Tell me the terms." "I cannot, because the terms only operate so long as they remain private to me. If I speak them aloud, they are no longer the terms by which I am governing myself. They become a thing the 2 of us are negotiating, and I will not negotiate them. You watch me." A silence. "You watch me at meals. You watch me from the library window. Yesterday morning you watched me come down the stairs from the gallery for the entire length of the staircase, and you did not look away when I reached the bottom. I do not mind being watched. I want to know whether you are aware that you are doing it." She turned around, slowly, with the kind of precision that costs a person something. "Yes, I am aware." "Why?" "Because I have asked you not to require me to negotiate the terms of my own discipline aloud, and that is one of the terms. Watching me is one of the terms." "Yes, I permit myself watching. I do not permit myself more than that." I sat at the long table in the library with my hand on a book and the rain on the window, and the most composed woman I had ever met telling me, in the only way she could bear to tell me, that she had built herself an entire architecture of self-denial in which the single permitted indulgence was the act of looking. How long? I have already told you that question is for a different time. It is no longer a different time. A very long pause. The rain. More than a year. She paused again. Before the negotiation with my sister. Before the contract. Before any of it. You did not negotiate with my father for the meadow alone. No. You negotiated for my sister because my sister was the one whose name made the contract plausible. Yes. And in all the months of negotiation, in all the visits, all the balls, you were never, in any of it, looking at her. No. The rain went on. My sister knew. A pause. Sabine looked at her hands. I believe she suspected. She fled to a convent rather than marry you because she suspected. I believe she fled rather than be married to a woman who had been, for the entirety of their engagement, paying attention to her younger sister at every social occasion they had ever attended. Yes, my sister gave up her place in the world for me. Your sister gave up her place in the world rather than be the unwitting instrument of something she did not wish to be the unwitting instrument of. Yes, you knew this. I suspected this. When she fled, I understood it for certain. And you came to Marchcombe House anyway. I came. she said, very quietly, hands folded, eyes on the rain. Because I had no other excuse to come, and I have wanted an excuse to come for 14 months. And your sister, in fleeing, had given me one. And I took it. And I am not sorry, Elspeth. I am sorry for the way I took it. I am not sorry that I took it. I rose from the long table. I crossed the library. I stopped perhaps 3 feet from her at the south window. She did not move. The rain on the window made the only sound in the room. Look at me. She looked at me. The discipline was visible now in a way it had not been before. The shoulders, the hands, the very specific tightness around her eyes. You watch me from across rooms. Yes, you will not negotiate the terms of your discipline. No, you will not come to my chamber. No, you will not, in any way that anyone in this house could see, treat me as your wife. Not in the way you mean. No. You will, however, build me a library, a faint sound, almost a breath. Yes, you will keep my fire higher than the fires in any other room of the house. Order from the cook the tea I drank once at a friend's house in London. Continue to watch me. Yes, I held her gray eyes with mine in the dim wet light. I was 21 years old. I had been her wife for 3 weeks. I had been, without knowing it, the silent object of her 14-month discipline. I am not going to break this open today. Her shoulders did not move, but something in her face shifted by perhaps a millimeter. No, I am going to wait. You may keep your discipline, for now. A pause. Then, with no inflection at all, and the entire weight of the discipline visible in the precision of the words, "Thank you, Elspeth." I went back to the long table, picked up my book, and left by the south door because the door nearest her would have meant passing within arm's length of her, and I had decided I was not going to require her to manage that on this afternoon. I walked through the cold corridor and up the stairs to my apartment, and I sat in the green chair by the fire in my sitting room, and I held the book in my lap unopened for the better part of an hour while I worked out what I was going to do. What I was going to do, I understood at the end of an hour, was wait. Not patiently, not passively. I was going to remain in the house and at the table and in her line of sight, and I was going to let her watch, and I was going to give her, in the quietest possible way, every reason to break. Lady Theodosia Greaves arrived on the following Friday, in a green carriage, with green and gold livery and a small Italian greyhound on her lap, and the absolute confidence of a woman who had been at Ashendale Castle a great many times and had never, in any of those visits, been told that her presence was inconvenient. Mrs. Hollinsworth received her at the door with an expression that suggested she had been preparing for this particular arrival since Tuesday afternoon and had several opinions about its timing that she did not propose to share. Sabine greeted her in the hall with what I had begun to recognize as her warmest manner, allowing Lady Theodosia to take her hand for perhaps 3 seconds without entirely repressing the corner of her mouth. "Sabine, darling, you look terrible." "Thank you, Theodosia. Where is she?" "I was on the stairs." She turned, looked at me for an indecent length of time, then handed her greyhound to Mrs. Hollinsworth and crossed the hall. "My dear, Lady Theodosia, you are not at all what I expected." She held out one ungloved hand. "Come down. I have driven 4 hours specifically to inspect you, and I do not propose to do it from the bottom of a staircase." I came down. Sabine, behind her, had become very still in the strained version of her composure. Lady Theodosia took my hand in both of hers and looked at me at close range. "She is rather more, Sabine." "I am aware. You did not say in your letter that she was rather more." "I did not propose to discuss her in a letter." "No, you would not." She turned back to me, holding my hand a beat longer than courtesy required. "I am Theodosia Greaves. I have known Sabine for 21 years. I am the closest thing she has to a sister, and the only person in England she trusts to tell her the truth. And I have come this week to make certain that she is not making a hash of you. I imagine she is making a hash of you. She is generally not gifted at this part. This part. The part where she is required to tell another human being what she wants." I looked at Sabine across the hall. She had become approximately as still as I had ever seen her, and the stillness told me with absolute clarity that Lady Theodosia Greaves had said, in 2 sentences, more than Sabine had said in 14 months. Theodosia. Sabine, dear. You will take tea with us at 5. I will take tea with you both at 5 and dine with you both at 7, and sit up with the Duchess of Ashendale until 2 in the morning in her library, and explain to her several things she has chosen not to permit herself to. Understand, I have come for the weekend. I will leave on Monday morning. You are welcome to be furious with me, and you will not, in any case, send me away. I had no intention of sending you away. Good. She turned back to me and gave my hand one small, precise squeeze. My dear, I am going to have an argument with your wife later this evening, and I am going to win it, and you are not to mind. Tomorrow she will be considerably more honest with you than she has been in the past 3 weeks. You may thank me at breakfast. She moved off toward the small drawing room. I stood at the foot of the staircase and looked across the marble at Sabine, who was looking back at me with an expression I had not previously seen on her face. It was not composure. It was something the discipline had been built to contain, disturbed by a single conversation conducted in a public hall by a woman who had not yet removed her traveling cloak. Sabine crossed the hall to me and stopped at the bottom of the staircase, closer than her usual precise yard of distance. I had not intended for you to meet her this weekend. I had not intended a great many things this month. Theodosia will say things to you. I would prefer if you understood that the things she says are not, necessarily, the things I would say. They are, however, the things you have not said. A pause. Yes, she said. Tea was conducted in the small green drawing room overlooking the knot garden, the same room in which Sabine and I had taken our first meal together in this house. Lady Theodosia had positioned herself in the chair I had used on my first day. Sabine sat in her usual chair. I was given the chair by the window, which placed me as a third party rather than the spouse, deliberate on Theodosia's part, arranging the room so that she could look at Sabine and Sabine could look at me and I could look at both of them. And the geometry of the conversation was such that anything said in it would be addressed to all 3 of us at once. Tell me, my dear, about your sister. She has taken vows at the Convent of St. Lyriel. Yes, I know that part. Tell me about her. I considered the question. The fire moved in the grate. Sabine, across from me, did not move at all. My sister is 24. She is dark where I am fair. She reads less than I do, and she rides better. She has, since she was 18, possessed the kind of unforced grace that makes women like her into objects of considerable male interest at country dances. She has been, I would say, the more visible daughter of our family for most of our lives, and she has carried that visibility with what I have always considered to be admirable patience. You speak of her with kindness. I love my sister. And she has, by your own account, given up her position in the world to spare you the consequences of a marriage she correctly suspected was not, in any meaningful sense, about her. Yes, you have not, since you arrived in this house, been to visit her. The convent does not permit visitors during the first 6 months. And after. After the 6 months, I will go to her. And do you have an answer for her, when she asks why you went through with it? Not yet, Lady Theodosia. Theodosia, my dear, you are extraordinary. Sabine, do you understand that she is extraordinary? I understand it. You have understood it for some considerable time. Yes, and you have not told her. A silence. The fire. The carriage clock chimed the quarter hour. I have not told her in the words you would consider sufficient. No, you have told her by other means. Books, fires, tea brought up from the kitchens, a mare offered for riding, a library wing rearranged in 2 weeks to contain everything she would have wanted, had she ever been able to afford it. I have heard about a great many things, Sabine, most of them silent. Theodosia, I am not scolding you, dear. I am simply observing. You are not simply observing. You have driven 4 hours specifically not to observe. I have driven 4 hours to determine whether she is the woman I suspected she was. She is. Therefore I am, now, prepared to scold. You will not, I trust, scold me in front of her. I will scold you in front of her, if scolding you in front of her is the only way to get you to hear it. She is your wife. She has been brought to a house she did not choose, on terms she did not negotiate, by a woman who has been watching her from across ballrooms for 14 months and has not had the courage to tell her so directly. She is owed a conversation. And you have been managing the situation privately, expensively, and at considerable cost to your own peace. It is showing in your shoulders, your handwriting, the fact that you have not eaten a full meal in 3 weeks. Theodosia, I am asking you to be finished. You may ask. I will decline. I made a small sound, something closer to an escaped breath, the recognition of having watched a person attempt to give a polite institutional order to a woman constitutionally incapable of accepting one. Theodosia turned her dark eyes to me. You see, my dear, she is hopeless at this. She will tell you, before the end of this weekend, several things she has not yet told you. She will tell them poorly. She will, very likely, attempt to tell them in language so precise that it will be possible to miss the substance entirely. You will need to listen carefully. You will need to require her, at certain points, to use different words. I have been listening carefully for 3 weeks. I imagine you have. She is not a woman accustomed to being heard. She has been Duchess in her own right since she was 29. There have not been a great many people in her life whose attention she has not been able to direct away from any subject she did not wish to discuss. You are, I think, the first one in some considerable time. She rose, crossed to Sabine's chair, and rested one ungloved hand briefly on her shoulder, the only piece of physical contact I had seen any human being attempt with Sabine Ardencroft in the entire span of our acquaintance. Sabine did not move. At the door, Theodosia turned. Dinner at 7, my dear. Wear the slate one. It suits you. She left. Sabine and I sat in the small green drawing room for perhaps a full minute without speaking. Elspeth, I should not have permitted that. You could not have prevented it. No. Theodosia is not preventable. I rose and crossed to the fire and did not, for some time, look at her. She is correct about your shoulders, the meals. Your hand has become smaller in the past week, as though you are attempting to fit more onto each page than the page is willing to hold. A long silence. Yes. You are managing this badly, Sabine. I am aware. Are you? I have been aware for some time. I have lacked any external confirmation of my awareness. Theodosia has provided it. I will absorb it. Whether I will act on it is a separate question. That is not an acceptable answer. She looked up. I am aware of that as well. I am going to dress for dinner. After dinner, you are going to sit up with her in your library and let her say the things she came here to say. Tomorrow morning, you are going to come to my apartment at 9 and tell me, in your own words, the things she has required you to recognize, not the discipline version. The version underneath the discipline. The version you have been refusing to permit yourself to say, even to yourself. Elspeth, I am not finished. You will tell me at 9. We will then walk in the orchard. I will not require you to find all the words at once. I will require you to find them. The discipline, Sabine, is over. She looked at me for a very long time. At 9, she said. At 9. Dinner was, by the standards of the rest of the day, almost pleasant. Theodosia spoke of London, and a piece of music she had recently heard, and the disgraceful behavior of a mutual acquaintance. Sabine responded in monosyllables. I responded in slightly more. I retired at 10. Theodosia and Sabine retired to the library together. I lay awake, and at 2:30 heard a door close in the west corridor, and fell, eventually, asleep. Sabine knocked on the door of my sitting room at 9, in a grey wool walking dress I had not previously seen, with small cuffed boots and no gloves. Her hair had been pinned more loosely than usual. There were, very faintly, the marks of a night that had not concluded until late. The orchard. The orchard. We went out. The rain had ceased in the night. The grass between the house and the orchard was wet. The orchard itself was the old one, planted in the 17th century, and the trees in it had begun their pale early blossom, and the air smelled of last night's rain and damp earth and the first sweet edge of the coming season. We walked the long aisle in silence for some distance. Sabine did not, at first, begin. I did not press her. I had said, the previous afternoon, that I would not require her to find all the words at once. I intended to honor that. She began at the fifth tree. I saw you for the first time at the Whitlock Ball in February of last year. You were standing at the edge of the dance, by the door to the supper room, with your back to a green silk curtain, holding a glass of something pale that you were not drinking, watching the dancers with an expression I had not seen on a young woman's face in some considerable time. It was not boredom. It was not contempt. It was the expression of a person who was understanding the dance as a thing to be observed rather than participated in, and finding the observation more interesting. I watched you for the duration of one quadrille. I did not approach. Why? Because I had already decided that I would, by the end of the evening, find out who you were, and I did not wish to find out by a route that would draw attention to the fact of my having inquired. I asked the orchestra leader, who had been employed at 3 houses I had attended that season, and who had observed me observing you, and who was discreet. He told me you were Miss Elspeth Marchcombe, the younger daughter of Lord Marchcombe of Stenholm, 20 years old at the time, and unmarried, and considered by the room to be the less remarkable of the 2 Marchcombe sisters. He said this with the kind of professional neutrality I understood as a small kindness. You learned my name from an orchestra leader. He has, in the 14 months since, been paid for several further inquiries. He has, on occasion, been able to tell me at which house parties you were expected, able to confirm you were present at a private recital at which I had also arranged to be present. You arranged to attend recitals to be in the same rooms as me. For 14 months. For 14 months. We walked past the 6th tree, the 8th. The blossoms moved in the small wind. I had no further question prepared. The negotiation with my sister began the following October. I waited 8 months because I could find no version of the negotiation that did not, on its face, look like what it was. The Stenholm meadow gave me the eventual excuse. The drainage suit gave me the eventual urgency. Your sister's age and rank made her the eventual instrument. I am not proud of any part of the construction, Elspeth. I am explaining it to you because you asked. You proposed marriage to my sister so that you could be in proximity to me. I proposed marriage to your sister so that I could be in proximity to your family, of which you are a member. I had hoped I would, in the course of the engagement, find some honest way to redirect it. I did not find one. I would have, I think, gone through with the marriage to your sister if she had not fled. I would have lived adjacent to you for the remainder of my life, in a state of permanent quiet observation, with the knowledge that I had not done you the considerable harm of telling you what I felt. My sister understood you better than you understood yourself. A very long pause. Yes, she has done a thing I cannot ever repay her for. You will, when she can receive visitors, write to her. You will say the truth in the letter. I will. We walked the remainder of the aisle without speaking. At the end, there was a small bench under the south wall where the old apricot trees grew, and we sat, and Sabine put her ungloved hands flat on the wood beside her, and looked at the wall, and did not look at me. There is more, Elspeth. There is the part you have not yet asked. I am aware. You may ask. I had known, since the previous afternoon, what the question was. You have built yourself an architecture of discipline so that you would not be required to ask me for anything. You will not, by any means available to you, come to my chamber. You will not treat me as your wife in any sense more than the official. Not without your asking. No. You believe you are sparing me something. Yes. I am sparing you the experience of being possessed by a woman who is 12 years older than you, considerably better placed in the world than you, and who has been watching you across rooms for 14 months without your knowledge. I have considered, in some detail, what that experience would feel like were it presented to a young woman of 21 as a fait accompli. I have concluded that I do not wish, under any circumstances, for you to feel it. You wish me to feel chosen. I wish you to feel asked, which I have never, properly, done. You did not ask me at Marchcombe House. No, I informed you. There is a great difference. You did not ask me at the altar. No, I made vows. There is a great difference. You have not asked me at any point in the past 3 weeks. No. I have arranged the house in such a manner that you could not avoid noticing my attention. I have not asked. I have told you I will not ask until you have asked first. This remains the case. The bench was very still. The wind moved the apricot blossom over us in a small, slow shower of pale petals. Sabine, I am asking with cool. She did not move. She did not turn her head. The discipline of 14 months held, in that instant, for one final fraction of a second, the way the surface of water holds before a stone strikes it. Then she turned her face to me. The gray of her eyes was not the cold gray of the hall at Marchcombe House. It was, in the soft light under the apricot wall, a gray warmed by the small reflected pink of the falling blossom, and by the considerable effort of a woman who had spent 14 months arranging her own life around the precise condition of not being permitted to look at me this way. Elspeth, you will be certain of this. I am certain. You are not, however, going to act on it today. Today you have, only this morning, told me the substance of a 14-month observation. I will require longer to know what I think. I am not asking you to take me to your chamber. I am asking you to understand that the asking when it comes is mine, and is already done. A very slow breath. Not a sigh. The kind of breath a person takes when an architecture they have been holding upright for 14 months is permitted, for the first time, to settle into a different shape. I understand. You will, I think, find that knowing the asking is done is a considerable burden lifted from you. I find it already. Good. I rose from the bench and held out my hand. She looked at it. She rose without taking it, which I had expected. We walked back to the house side by side. The apricot petals followed us for a few yards, and then stayed behind. Theodosia left after breakfast on Monday morning, taking my hand in both of hers on the steps of the carriage. You are doing remarkably well, my dear. I am not, in general, in the habit of admiring women I have known for less than a week. I make an exception in your case. Thank you, Theodosia. Sabine is afraid of you. I am beginning to understand that. She will require continued reassurance. She will not ask for it. She will instead arrange small details of the household, so that the reassurance is conveyed indirectly. You will know, by the time I see you again, the difference between her direct affection and her indirect affection. They are not, in her case, identical. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, turned to Sabine. Try not to be insufferable about it. I make no promises. The carriage moved off. Sabine turned to me. I have business with the steward this morning. I will see you at lunch. You may, at lunch, sit beside me at the small dining table rather than across from me. I will not require it of you. I am suggesting it. A pause, the kind I had, by then, learned to interpret as the small, involuntary recognition of a thing she had not yet allowed herself to want. Yes. The weeks that followed had the texture of a household in which a long-held architecture was, very gradually, being permitted to settle into a different shape. At lunch that day, she sat beside me rather than across from me. At dinner the following evening, when I asked her about a passage in one of the new books, she rose and crossed to the cabinet behind me, and stood at my shoulder to hole while she pointed out the relevant passage. Her sleeve, briefly, touched mine the first contact, however incidental, that had passed between us in 5 weeks of marriage. We did not mention it. At breakfast on Sunday, when the toast had grown cold, she rang the bell and ordered fresh toast, and then poured my tea herself, which was a thing a duchess did not, by the established etiquette of her own house, do for her own wife. In the second week after the orchard, Sabine asked whether I would care to sit with her in the library that evening, rather than retire directly. It was the first time she had asked me anything resembling an invitation. She read, in a slow, steady voice I had not previously heard her use, a long passage from a French essayist, 4 feet of polished oak floor between us. We did this every Sunday evening for the next 3 weeks. On the third such evening, she did not rise to bid me good night. She sat with the closed book in her lap. In the orchard, you asked. I have been, in the weeks since, attempting to find the version of acknowledgement that does not require me to make of myself an immediate request in return. You have been giving me space. I am explaining, because I have been instructed by a person whose judgment I respect, that I am required to use my own words for these matters with increasing frequency. Theodosia. Yes, I have been thinking about your asking for 3 weeks. I have been thinking about what it would mean, on any given evening, to cross the 4 feet of floor that separates this chair from yours. I am asking, now, whether the 4 feet may be crossed. I sat in the chair opposite hers. The library was very quiet. Yes, Sabine. She rose, set the closed book on the small table, and crossed the 4 feet with a deliberation that was, I think, the slowest of any movement I had seen her make in my life. She stopped at 1 foot of distance and held out her ungloved hand. I took it. She drew me up out of the chair. The hand was warm. The hand was steady. We stood very close, her gray eyes level with my own. The discipline of 14 months had not vanished from her face. It had, simply, ceased to be the only thing in it. I touched her jaw first, the smallest of touches, the back of 1 finger along the line from ear to chin. Her gray eyes closed. She breathed in once, sharply, the way a person breathes who has been holding her breath for a very long time and has only, in the present moment, been given permission to release it. I kissed her. It was not frantic. It was the kind of kiss that 2 careful women exchange when one of them has been, for 14 months, an architecture of careful denial, and the other has been, without knowing it, the silent occupant of the inner room of that architecture. It was patient. It was slow. She drew back, eventually, by a hand's breadth, 1 hand at the small of my back. I will sleep, tonight, in my own chamber. For some time yet, I think. I know. You will not, I trust, mistake the rate at which this proceeds for any decrease in the attention I have been carrying for 14 months. I will not, Sabine. She kissed me a second time, smaller, briefer, walked me to the door, bid me good night on the threshold, and watched me go up the long staircase. She did not follow. The spring became the summer. The orchard apricots gave way to plums, and the plums to small green apples that ripened slowly through the long warm afternoons of an English July, and Sabine and I walked the orchard together with greater frequency than we had walked it in any week of our shared residence. She did, eventually, come to my chamber. I will not write the date of it. It is sufficient to say it arrived in its own time, on its own terms, with the asking on both sides perfectly clear, and the discipline of 14 months long since set aside, and that the morning afterward she did not retreat to the formal distance of the earlier weeks. She breakfasted with me, poured the tea, and made, in passing, an observation about a passage from a French essayist we had been reading together, with 1 ungloved hand resting lightly on the table beside mine for the duration of the conversation. In August, I went to the Convent of St. Lyriel. My sister received me in the small whitewashed parlor. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair cut short, her dark eyes the same, her face possessed of a particular settlement I had not previously seen on it. You are well. I am well, Cordelia. You are married. To Sabine Ardencroft. Tell me. I told her, not the orchard, not the library, not the long warm afternoons, but the substance of it. The arrival at Marchcombe House, the contract, the watching, the 14 months. The eventual confessions in pieces, which had, by August, become a thing I could speak of with a steady voice. Cordelia listened without interrupting. When I had finished, she sat for some time with my hand in hers. I am glad it was you. I am glad the woman whose attention had been resting on you for so long was given, by my flight, the opportunity to act on it honestly. I have been praying, for 6 months, that this would be the outcome. Sabine's letter arrived in May. The Mother Superior allowed me to read it. It was, I think, the most honest letter I have ever received from a person of her rank. You have not regretted it. I have regretted leaving Mamma. I have regretted the manner of my departure. I have not regretted the substance of my decision. I am, here, content. I am, here, performing the only useful service of which I would have ever been capable. I had not previously known that I would be capable of such usefulness. I am, in that sense, grateful to Sabine, since without her proposal I would never have understood what I was in fact suited to. "You are weeping," she said. "I am, yes. Do not, there is nothing to weep about. I have, in 6 months, become the version of myself I always had it in me to be. You have, in 6 months, become a version of yourself I had not previously seen, but had often suspected lay beneath the surface of the daughter our mother insisted on overlooking. We have, between the two of us, arranged ourselves more correctly than the arrangement our family had attempted to impose on us." She gave me her handkerchief and held my hand for the remainder of the visit. I returned to Ashendale on the second day after. Sabine met the carriage at the door, which she had not done before, handed me down, and walked me into the house with one hand at my elbow. In the small green drawing room with the door closed, she asked, very quietly, and I told her, "I will write to her again. She will be glad of the letter. You will tell me when you write to her next what to say." "I will." The autumn came on. We rode together rather than walked, the chestnut mare for me and Sabine's tall gray for her. We did not talk a great deal. We had, by then, said the substantial things that required saying. In November, we went to London for the small private season that the Duchess of Ashendale was required, by rank, to attend the first occasion since the wedding, on which we would be publicly visible together in a London ballroom. The first gathering was at the Duke of Whitlock's house, the same ballroom in which Sabine had first observed me holding a glass of pale wine beside a green silk curtain. We arrived together. Sabine wore the slate silk and the diamonds her great-aunt had left her. I wore the dove gray the dressmaker had finished in October. We were announced together, and the ballroom performed the small collective adjustment that London ballrooms perform when something they have been gossiping about for 6 months has, at last, arrived in person. Sabine did not flinch. I did not flinch either. I had decided in the carriage that I would not be the partner who lowered the tone. We danced the second set, a slow figure that gave the dancers a great deal of opportunity to look at one another and very little opportunity to speak. We looked at each other for the entirety of it. The ballroom looked at us. At the close, Sabine inclined her head 1/2 inch in the way she had done at the altar, and I returned the inclination, and the room did the small collective adjustment that London ballrooms perform when something they had been wondering about has been answered without the trouble of inquiry. In the carriage on the way back, Sabine sat beside me rather than across from me, close enough that the side of her gown rested against mine for the entire journey, and she did not adjust herself away from the contact. At the door of the Ashendale London house, she paused on the steps. "That was the room in which I first saw you. It is, in the strict accounting, the room that began all of this. I did not, before tonight, expect to ever stand in it again with anything other than a private feeling that the room had cost me a great deal. And tonight the room cost me nothing. You are no longer the woman who walked into the hall at Marchcombe House. No, I am not. I am no longer the woman on the staircase. You were never that woman, Elspeth. You were always the woman in the green drawing room and the orchard and the library at the long table. The staircase was merely where I happened to find you." She held out her ungloved hand. I took it. We went into the house together. In the small private parlor, with the door closed, she drew me to her by the hand she was still holding, put her other hand at the side of my face, and said, very quietly, "Little one." I almost laughed. "It is, you understand, the only thing I am permitted to call you, that no one else will ever have called you. The first words I said to you, in any room you and I had ever shared in any meaningful sense. I would like, occasionally, to be permitted to use them again, privately, with your permission. You may, occasionally, use them, on the condition that I may, occasionally, return them." A small pause. "That would be acceptable." "Little one." "Elspeth, we did not, that night, retire to separate chambers. I will not write of the rest of it. It is sufficient to say that the careful, slow patience that had characterized every honest thing between us continued, in its own way, into the small hours, and that the morning afterward found us at the same breakfast table, and the table had only the 2 places set. In the spring I returned to the convent of St. Lirial. Sabine came with me. We sat under an espaliered pear tree on a stone bench, the three of us, and Cordelia held my hand on one side and looked, with the steady consideration that had always been her clearest quality, at Sabine on the other. Your Grace, you have written me 3 letters. They were the kind of letters that women of our family had not previously received from women of yours. They were intended in that spirit. You will, I hope, continue to write. I will continue to write. Cordelia looked at her for a long moment. I am content. You will look after my sister. You will, in addition, permit her to look after you. A small pause, the pause I had, by then, learned was always present when Sabine was required to consent to a thing she had not previously permitted herself to require. Yes, sister. Good. We left the convent in the late afternoon and rode back to the inn, at which we had taken rooms for the night. Sabine sat beside me, as she had done at the London season, her gloved hand resting over mine for the duration of the journey. At the inn she sat by the fire and watched me read for an hour, and at the end of the hour she rose and crossed the floor between her chair and mine and rested one ungloved hand briefly at the side of my face. Little one, you have, in the course of 1 year, rebuilt me. You have, in the course of 1 year, asked at last. Yes. That is the only thing it ever required. She kissed me. She had, by then, long since learned how to kiss me in a manner that conveyed every 14th month of the discipline, without imposing any of it. The kiss lasted only as long as kisses by the fire of small inns are permitted to last, and at the end of it she rested her forehead briefly against mine. The years that followed had the texture of a life shared. There are no further significant events to write of, because the significant events had all happened in the first year, and the years afterward were the slow, steady accumulation of a marriage that had begun in a manner no one would have written and had become, in its own time, a thing only the two of us understood. Sabine remained the Duchess of Ashendale. She did not, in any year of our shared residence, regret the meadow at Stenholm. I remained, in any way the world could see, her wife. I did not, in any year of our shared residence, regret the morning on the staircase. Cordelia took her final vows in the autumn of the 2nd year. She has, in the years since, become Mother Superior of the convent. She writes to me at the new moon of every month. She writes to Sabine at the full. Her letters are short and precise and very kind, and Sabine keeps every one of them in a small inlaid box in the drawer of her desk, and the box is, I notice, no longer locked. Theodosia died in the spring of the 7th year. She had by then become more of an aunt to the two of us than any aunt either of us had ever been entitled to claim. She left her greyhound to me in her will. The greyhound lived a further 4 years, and is buried in the orchard at Ashendale under the old apricot wall. Sabine, in the most recent of the years, has begun to use my name as easily as she had once used her own. She had not, in the first year, been able to do this. She has, by long practice, taught herself to do it. I had not, when I was 21 and standing on the staircase at Marchcombe House, expected to spend the rest of my life teaching a woman of considerable rank and impossible composure how to say my name without the half-second pause. I did. I have. We have. It was the only thing that had ever required teaching. She still calls me little one. Occasionally, in private. I still return it. The room, in those moments, contains nothing else. It is, by every honest measure, enough.